In this video, I'm going to talk about the famous 4% rule. Maybe you haven't heard about it, but it is famous. We're going to talk about kind of where it came from, how is it useful, and how it relates to financial freedom, early retirement. So if you're interested in investing, financial freedom, real estate, make sure you stick around, watch the whole video. You're going to learn something very interesting at the end and how to help you achieve financial freedom. So the 4% rule was created by Bill Bengen. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He created that in 1994. So Mr. Bengen was a financial advisor. I don't know which company he worked for. And so his concern was to help his clients that had like a stock portfolio, how to leverage that stock portfolio to convert their assets, their saving into a stream of income, which is something that we've talked about often, and that I've keep talking to everybody that has a retirement savings account or a 401k. How are you going to convert these savings into a stream of income for retirement? So this is key. So his goals are very similar to mine, obviously, right? So I have clients and I also want them to invest in such a way that they have a secure retirement, and they have enough funds to do that. And I want to do that with the minimum amount of money, and I want it to be very secure so that they don't have to worry about it. I already have a few things in common with him, right? So he didn't tell any of his clients to buy an annuity, as far as I know. So he really stayed focused on, let's leverage your stock portfolio, your investments, your savings, and then convert that into a stream of income. So that's what he focused on. He didn't say, oh, let's just go buy annuities, because he probably knew himself that these annuity payout, they're not that good. And when we talk about having his clients having a secure retirement and making sure that they have funds that would be long enough, his plan was really for them to have enough funds to basically provide retirement income for them for 30 years. So that's the time frame kind of he had in mind, at least 30 years, and then provide a legacy for their children. So he basically looked at all kinds of different scenarios. He looked at different stock markets, economic conditions, and kind of what would happen. He looked at the depression. He looked at different, economic conditions. And basically, he tried different withdrawal rate. So he tried 3%, and he said, oh yeah, everybody can easily have enough money for 30 years, no problem. Then he said, okay, well, let's do 4%, and let's do 5 and 6 and 7. So he tried a wide variety of withdrawal rates and came up with the one that was the safest, and he called it Safe Max. But that name didn't really pick up, right? Because it's called the 4% rule now. Everybody calls it the 4% rule. And what people don't really understand is that it's that 4% rule applies only at the beginning for the initial withdrawal that you're doing. So it's not 4% every year. It's 4% for the first year, and then every subsequent year you basically adjust that initial amount with inflation. So this is kind of how this is calculated. So if your stock market suddenly drops all the way, I mean, that doesn't mean that you take 4% of the lower asset value. You would take the adjusted amount plus the previous amount plus the inflation. So Bengen also tried all kinds of different portfolios. So he tried more stock focused, 100% bonds, all the way to 100% stock. Different kind of combination, and basically he ran that into the 50 scenarios that he had, and that's how he came up with that. And the stock portfolio that he had in mind that worked the best with the 4% rule and to secure the 30-year of retirement income was a stock portfolio around 50 to 75% in stock and the rest in bonds. He preferred actually the 75%, but most people are sticking to the 50%, 50-50, 50% in stock, 50% in bonds. For Bengen, the most critical factor in all this was always the inflation. So he always was very concerned about that and ran multiple scenarios also about that. But before we get there, there's another guy that came into play. It's been Michael Kitz's, and his concern was about the stock valuation itself. So you can imagine that if the stock market, like it is today, the stock market is super high, then maybe 4% is a little bit too much to take as an initial payment. Maybe we want to take a little bit more because, first of all, the stock is probably more likely to go down, and then maybe 4% of that my inflated portfolio is going to be too much and won't be sustainable over the years. Similarly, if the stock market is super low, the valuation of my portfolio is very low, so 4% of a very low amount, I don't want to be, living, I want to have the same standard of living when I retire than prior to retirement. So he looked at that. He looked at these stock valuation scenarios, and this is when things got a little bit more complicated. And then with the information from Kitz's and basically Bengen went back and looked at the whole 4% rule, and basically came up with a number of tables based on inflation and the price earning ratio for the stock market. So he was using the Shiller CAPE index, CAPE, cyclical adjusted or average price earning ratio. So that gives you an idea of how overvalued or undervalued the stock market is. So that's what they used, and then based on that information, they came up with sustainable withdrawal rate for the portfolio. And when we were very close to the 4.5 rules, now these withdrawal rates are between 4.5 and 13%. And the 13% are really under a high deflation and a low PE ratio environment. So this is really extreme. I don't know if that ever happened in history, but they basically went through all these scenarios, and then that's basically what it came down to, from 4.5 into 13, where 4.5 was a super valued, overvalued stock market, and also a very high inflation environment. So just to give you an example, in today's environment, we are in a low inflation environment, and the Shiller CAPE index is around 33. So that would make it a very high valued stock market. In this particular case, when I looked at the table, the withdrawal rate that you would set for your initial thing would be 5%. So notice that 5% is more than the 4%, and that's because they really ran some more tests and scenarios, and that basically means that it was a little bit too safe maybe at 4%, and now they feel like you can probably ramp it up a little bit. And that 4% was really kind of like the worst case scenario. So all these scenarios are based on this money being stuck in a tax deferred environment like a 401k or something like that. They don't talk about commission, and they don't talk about taxes when they talk about the withdrawing the money. So if your money is in a mutual fund, they have all kinds of fees, even if you are in a tax deferred environment. So you have to pay those fees. You also have to pay ordinary income when you take the money out, right? So it all depends on that situation. Let's assume that you have $1 million in there, and then that means that you would take, let's say, 5% of your stock market for the first year. So you take $50,000 in the first year, and then next year at the 2% environment, 2% inflation, you would be adding another $1,000 to that. So they'd be at $51,000 next year, right? Something like that. So this is kind of where my approach is a little bit different than what Bengen recommended, right? So these guys are financial advisors. They don't do real estate. They don't do real estate investment. All they're focused on is mutual fund, money management, stock market, bonds, and all of that. This is how they make their money. So they're not going to recommend people to go and invest in real estate. Of course, I make money in real estate, so I'm going to tell you, hey, real estate is the greatest thing on earth. So do your research. But for me, one of the reasons why I think real estate is so great is that if I had that same $1 million in an apartment building, for example, at a 7% cap. Okay, so it's not difficult to find a 7% cap apartment building. In fact, I'm selling 3 right now at 7% cap in Memphis, so it's not difficult to find. So that means that 7% cap rate means that it's how much money you're getting in return, assuming that everything has been paid, and then that you don't have a mortgage. So that apartment is free and clear. So you would get $70,000 on that particular a year in revenue, net cash flow from that property after everything has been paid, property management, utilities, insurance, and everything. $70,000. That's how much you have left. You don't have to pay commission on that. I don't have to worry about that. I pay ordinary income tax the same way that you would pay ordinary income tax when you withdraw your money from your 401k. So no changes there, except that I'm making $20,000 more than that $1 million that I have stuck in my 401k. And that 401k has a lot of rules associated with that on early withdrawal. So there's a bunch of penalties on that. And if a little bit later, you also have some minimum disbursements that you have to do, minimum distribution that you have to do after 7.5 years. So you have to calculate all that. And you may be actually forced to take more than the 5% that you calculated. But it all depends. You have to run your numbers and figure that out. So this is why I highly recommend that you consider at least a portion of your portfolio in real estate, because when we're talking about capital gains and all of that, I mean, this 1 million apartment building, maybe you paid $200,000 10-20 years down the road, and it just appreciated to that level over time. Maybe you did 1031 exchange and then kind of like combine a bunch of different real estates into this big apartment building and have it paid off. So there's a lot of tax deferment. There's lots of tax advantages on real estate, a lot more tax advantages than in a stock market. So make sure that you look into all that. And now you're making $20,000 more a year with the same amount of equity, I would say, in real estate compared to the same amount in your 401k. So look around, make sure that this is something that if you're really interested in real estate, learning more about real estate, financial freedom, and I guess taxes too. I've talked about taxes a few times. But if you're interested in any of these topics, make sure you watch the rest of the videos in my channel. If you like this video, make sure you do a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.